Reversing narcissistic abuse. Don't just heal the narcissistic abuse trauma. Reverse the narcissistic devaluation programming, because you have value simply because you exist. Today, we're going to ask the question, am I stigmatizing borderlines? Borderline viewer accuses me of stereotyping all borderlines. Am I projecting my personal pain onto misunderstood people with borderline personality disorder? Hi, this is Mike, and this is the Reversing Narcissistic Abuse channel. I do have some resources for you. You can go here to reversenarcabuse.com. You see that under the left there. I've got an introductory video course on what narcissistic devaluation programming is. And by the way, this is for everybody. I know that in the past I really focused, and today we're going to be focusing on abuse from borderline personality disorder romantic partners. But I'm here to help anybody who has been narcissistically devalued and abused, including borderlines and narcissists. But to understand that, you have to understand what the programming really is. How have you been programmed to be devalued, and how have you been programmed to then devalue others? We can't really heal until we understand that. In my experience, virtually all therapy really just addresses just the outer wounds and doesn't get to any real healing. Some action-oriented therapy like DBT therapy actually does. So since we're talking about BPD sufferers, if you do DBT therapy and the workbook, really put yourself into it, you can learn how to suppress the symptoms and act in a way that is loving towards your partners. It's going to take a lot of work, though. And just to be clear, I have nothing but compassion for everybody who's been narcissistically abused. The narcissist doesn't turn into a narcissist unless there's some major problem. My experience looking at it is every single one of them have been narcissistically devalued. There's some argument to say that there might be something physical in the brain. I'm not going to get into that, but I think we can all agree that the vast majority of them were very harshly abused as infants and children, which is what resulted in where they are now. This is also true for borderlines, which we're going to be talking about. So again, what are we talking about today? Am I stigmatizing borderlines? Am I projecting my personal pain onto misunderstood BPDs? I've said in numerous videos, many, many times over, how much compassion I have. There is nobody on the planet that has been through more hell than somebody who suffers from BPD. Nobody. And there is no hell worse than living with especially untreated BPD. So I am not stigmatizing, attacking anybody. Having said that, everything I just said does not in any way minimize the abuse and the trauma that can absolutely, completely destroy the lives of the innocent, well-meaning people who don't suffer from personality disorders, and they get involved with borderlines especially, and they go out of their way to love them, to take care of them, and their lives completely get just gutted from the inside out. Completely destroys their lives for decades. So anytime that I hear somebody minimizing that, I come to the defense of the victims. And so if you're coming onto this channel and you've got another agenda than to support the people who have been unjustly victimized, innocently victimized by these horrific relationships, I'm going to point it out. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to be completely clear. Let's take a look at the quote. Here's the quote that was left, I found on my channel today. So this is in response to, let's see, which video is it? Let me just double check to make sure exactly what video we're talking about. This is the video 5 Borderline Traits That Destroy Relationships. Okay? That's a great video. Go ahead and take a look at it. So this person responding to that video says, And I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna read the whole quote, and then I'm gonna go in and we're gonna analyze it together. And then you can come to the conclusion if this person is right or not. This person says, this video seems to come from a very personal place. I sympathize with it. I think it does everyone with BPD a great disservice though. It really seems like you're describing someone who has BPD comorbid with something that needs to be further discussed. BPD on its own is not as it's described in this video. I don't hate this video, but it's important not to compare everyone with BPD as the same because not every borderline is the same. Don't project the pain of your experience with a label onto everyone who has a label. This video, in my opinion, is evidence of something not yet diagnosed that I know of. Wow, I've discovered a brand new mental illness. Wow, they should put me into some really, amazing book or something. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at it. So this person says this video seems to come from a very personal place. All right, so that's just called gaslighting, and it's called victim blaming. And this is, we're gonna make it about me. This is a very common borderline and narcissist. Borderlines and narcissists aren't the only ones that do this, by the way. Just, any pain in the ass, person can do this. So to say that this is very personal right off the bat is to minimize, devalue, and to design to gaslight me. Well, you're obviously having a lot of feelings, so we can't take any of this personal. Now, that video wasn't coming from a very personal place. I've been doing this channel for a long time by the time I made that video, and what this video used to be, the one thing that heals BPD and NPD abuse, was designed to help people who have been horrifically damaged as a result of being in relationships with untreated borderlines, and to share with you how I cured myself of that. For years, I no longer have rumination, I no longer have pain, I have no resentment towards my borderline abuser. I take full responsibility for my codependence and how I got there. And I teach people exactly what to do to heal. So, of course, it's a personal place, but I'm not coming from a personal place anymore like I've got some kind of axe to grind. I happen to have experience that not a lot of people have. And people who have had this particular kind of abusive trauma needs advice from somebody who's been through it. So the very thing you're trying to criticize me of, in other words, I have an agenda and I'm not able to see things clearly because it's very personal. That's a very devaluing thing to do, but it actually is what gives me the ability to know what the hell I'm talking about. The person goes on to say, I sympathize with it. So, this is very, very passive aggressive. You attack somebody, then you turn around and say, but, hey, nothing personal. It doesn't mean anything that you sympathize with it, because you don't. You go out of your way to have a completely different viewpoint. You want to say, I sympathize with your pain, but you're obviously out of touch. So again, I'm being devalued as you pretend to connect with me. And before I go any further, let me just say, this person does not reveal to us what their personal experience is and what their personal agenda is when it comes to borderline personality disorder. I can only assume that this person is a borderline because the only people who come onto this channel and talk like this are borderlines. I don't rule out the possibility that an extremely enmeshed codependent who feels defensive about their relationship and is this happened in the beginning of this channel. People would come on who were with their borderlines and their borderlines hadn't discarded them yet. So they'd been with them for a few weeks or a few months, and they, would want to say, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm with a borderline. I know how to handle them, and everything is great. And I'm like, yeah, come talk to us in a year, 2 years. Tell us how great it is then. Because, it is great, or you're in denial during, the back and forth period. But once you get discarded, that's a whole other deal. So I give the possibility this might be an enmeshed codependent. But I'm going to take a guess, 99% this is a borderline. And again, you come onto my channel and you're going to leave a comment, be authentic and be upfront about, I am this is my experience, here's my opinion. You're going to get a much better response from me if you have the balls to put yourself out there and say, here's who I am. I'm a borderline, or I'm a partner of a borderline, or I'm a therapist, or whatever you are. But just to come on here, take no responsibility for who you are, make no revelation about who you are, and to just sit back, again, none of us knows who you are, and anonymously, take pot shots. That's a very wimpy, inauthentic place to come from, in my experience. That's just my opinion. And I'm very clear about who I am. I've made it very clear. As Sam Vaknin would put it, I am a self-styled expert, but I have the personal experience to back it up. All right, so he sympathizes with me coming from my personal place. I think it does everyone with BPD a great disservice, though. And he's going to tell us why. It really seems like you're describing someone who has BPD comorbid with something that needs to be further discussed. So again, people who come onto this with this condescending, passive-aggressive attitude think they're the first person to come up with this. So do you really honestly think you're the first person to tell me that I am conflating NPD with BPD, or that I'm conflating a comorbid with an actual BPD? The argument behind this, which comes mostly from borderlines, is that, no, you don't understand. Borderline personality disorder is different. We're not sociopaths. We're not psychopaths. We're not the narcissists. So what happens is borderlines want to create this black and white thing. They want to say that narcissists know what they're doing and they plan out your demise, and that's just not true. There are some narcissists that do that. There are some borderlines that do that. And the narcissists that do that would be called psychopaths. They would be called malignant, overt, and even then it's not as black and white as that. Narcissists, like borderlines, oftentimes go into relationships wanting things to work out. They have a fantasy, they want to be made happy. They don't get into their incredible, horrific manipulation until after their fantasy is destroyed. And then they can be sociopathic, psychopathic, and all that. But let's remember, borderlines have also been called secondary psychopaths. So again, the argument that borderlines want to make is that, and again, they're not telling the entire process that they go through. They're focusing on their experience most of the time, which is that they're filled with emotions. Filled with emotions they cannot regulate. So, and they make a lot of understandable conflations because they are regressed. They're coming from their infantile traumatic state. They regress their infantile need and their infantile idealization with empathy. They're filled with squishy, loving feelings. But empathy, as I've said, is not sympathy. And empathy is not temporary. So even though psychologists screw this up and they have different kinds of empathy, they get all stuck in their intellect about, there's functional empathy and then there's this empathy and that. Look, there's empathy. Empathy means one thing. It means that you have the ability to feel within the other person. Sympathy is different. Sympathy is when you are overwhelmed by somebody else's feelings and you take their feelings on. Most empaths don't realize that they're really sympaths, and it's nothing to be proud of. It means you have absolutely zero control over your nervous system. You walk into the room, somebody else has a feeling and you get pulled into it and you have that feeling as well. That's not something to pat yourself on the back for. Empathy says, I have my own feelings. I have my own sense of self. I have my own identity. There's a person over there that is having a feeling. I can understand what that feels like. I might even have some sympathy for them, but I have the ability to stay within my own identity. And even if that person makes me angry, even if that person isn't doing what I want, I still have the ability to consciously go, and here are the actions I need to take to make sure that I treat that person well. That's empathy. So when borderlines say I'm filled with empathy, what they mean is that they're filled with a squishy feeling that's temporary. And the moment that you either don't fulfill their fantasy, or they get disappointed with you, or they split on you, or whatever it is that they do, they have the ability to turn that off and then become the secondary psychopath. And then they're going to justify it and say, well, I can't help it. Or they're going to say, you did this to me, you did that to me, therefore I now hate you. And they become sociopathic and abusive. And they're going to then want to say, but you don't understand, I'm not a narcissist. A narcissist knows what they're doing. They're evil. I'm not evil. I don't know what I'm doing. But the bottom line is, it doesn't matter. The end result feels exactly the same. And again, the point that is of this channel, which I am actively responding to in this comment, is that the point of this channel is that in the pursuit of trying to understand, help, and heal the borderline, we don't need to become so codependent that we allow ourselves to be gaslit out of the horrific abuse that's happened to us. And we also do not need to minimize the fact that the borderlines are coming from a very damaged, wounded place, and the fact that they have the experience that they can't help their impulses. You hear what I just said? They have the experience that they can't help their impulses, because they do. It's very, very, very difficult, but they do have the ability to act differently than their impulses. Just because they have that experience doesn't somehow minimize the damage that they cause. And if you have two people and they walk up to a stranger and stab them in the eye with an ice pick, and another person does the same thing and stabs another person in the eye with the ice pick, to then say, well, one person was a borderline. They can't help it. They had an overwhelming impulse. They're actually really good people. They're filled with all kinds of loving feelings at other times. So you can't get mad at them. The other guy, oh, that was a narcissist. He knew, he was planning it out. So we can judge them because they meant to do it. The end result is the same for the person that gets stabbed in the eye with an ice pick. And so borderlines, when they're defending themselves, they tend to be very selective about their own internal landscape. But the people who are on the other side of it, look, you can be loving 99% of the time. But if in that 1% you chop off somebody's foot, you slash their tire, you destroy their, once you devalue somebody at that level, once you've done it once, you can't just come back and say, oops. It doesn't work like that. Borderlines, the world is going to hold borderlines to the same standard they hold everybody else. And this whole woke nonsense of making it okay for borderlines to do what they do, and I don't have the right to help people who have been narcissistically devalued to a point where they have their own internal programmed abuse response that stays with them for decades if it's not dealt with. To sweep that under the rug does everybody a disservice, including the borderline. So we can't have a double standard here. This person wants us to have a double standard. So that's why he says, I'm doing borderlines a great disservice though. He says, it really seems like you're describing someone who has BPD comorbid with something else that needs to be further discussed. In other words, if this was somebody who was a BPD comorbid NPD, then that would be different. In other words, BPDs that aren't comorbid NPDs, they aren't secondary psychopaths. They don't respond. They don't discard. They're not abusive. They're not what you're pointing out. Again, this person doesn't reveal their expertise, their experience, or the most likely fact that they are a borderline, and making this all about themselves. Because that's what this is. Assuming you're a borderline, you're making this about you. I don't know you. I only know you now because you left a comment. I didn't come knocking on your door and say, hey, borderline, I know about borderlines, therefore I know everything about you. I don't know anything about you. But the fact that you're revealing this shows that you have guilt about this, that you do this, and you can't help it, and you're justifying it, and you don't want other people to respond to you that way. You don't want people to judge you. But here's the truth of the matter. Nobody gives a crap what your diagnosis is. If you really are somebody with BPD and you don't do these things, whatever the 6 traits that borderlines, how they destroy relationships. If you really don't do any of those things, nobody's going to care what your diagnosis is. If somebody's in a relationship with you and you're treating them well and they find out you're a borderline and then they watch my video, they're not going to go, you know what, I was having a great time with you, but I saw this video where this guy said, here are the 6 things that you do, and even though you don't do these things, I know you have this diagnosis, so therefore I'm going to stigmatize you and I'm going to leave you. It's not going to happen. People respond to you based on your behavior towards them, and no amount of intellectualizing it and distancing it and trying to tell me that what I'm doing is that I'm overgeneralizing, no amount of trying to do that is going to change whatever you are doing to other people and how they respond to you. And again, I don't know you. If you treat people fine, they're not going to care what your diagnosis is. They're only going to care if they're having a good time in the relationship. All right, so it really seems like you're describing someone as BPD comorbid with something else to be further discussed. Again, this is a big borderline thing, and I've said this over and over again. There is no difference when it comes to the experience of the people who are abused. If you've been abused by a borderline or a narcissist, it feels exactly the same, because it is exactly the same. And that's because, as I've said, borderlines have been called covert narcissists. They've been called vulnerable narcissists. They've been called all kinds of narcissists, and it doesn't mean comorbid. It means that borderline personality disorder is its own form of narcissism. It may not have the title of NPD, it has its own title of BPD, but that's because it's very specific. But here are 3 things that all borderlines have. So let me go through. He's then going to, again, try and make this convoluted, I think it's a he. Yeah, based on the name, I assume it's a he. He's going to make this convoluted intellectualized argument, which is really designed to gaslight you and confuse you so that you don't have any frame of reference for what's happening to you. So he goes on to say, BPD on its own is not as it's described in this video. No specifics. Give me specifics. Tell me what I've said that does not align with BPD. Go ahead. Here's what I know. What I know about BPD is that there are 3 things, and I'm only picking 3. There's a lot more. But there are 3 things that all BPDs do. Number 1, they split. If you don't split, that's the main thing. You're not a borderline. So splitting means that you cut things into black and white. You either idealize or devalue. There's no place in the middle, which again, empathy is not this bipolar thing that goes back and forth. Empathy is, even though I'm having a feeling, I know what is a loving act. I'm really mad at you right now. I really hate you right now. I'm really disappointed with you. I'm really frightened of you. But I know how to act in a way that's loving. That's empathy. Not, I have this squishy feeling and I have this impulse to be really loving to you because I'm idealizing you. And now all of a sudden I'm afraid of being enmeshed and consumed. And now my head's telling me you're out to get me. So I am justified to act really horribly towards you. There is no empathy in that. Idealization is not empathy. It's projection. It's transference and projection. Empathy means that you're not projecting, you're not transferring, and you're not acting on impulse only. All right, what else? So BPD on its own is not as described in this video. I don't hate this video. Who cares? If you hate the video, say you hate the video. So here we have somebody, again, I think it's a borderline, who wants you to believe that they don't have any negative feelings. I have negative feelings. If I hate something, I'll tell you I hate it. If it hurts my feelings, if it makes me angry, I'll tell you. So again, be authentic. It doesn't somehow make it okay that you're gaslighting me. You are actually doing everything you're describing me of. You're overgeneralizing me. You're overgeneralizing my video. You're not being authentic. You're not being upfront. You're not being vulnerable with your own experience with it. Those are all the things that you're describing, that you're accusing me of doing. And it doesn't make it okay that you say, and I don't hate the video, and I sympathize, because then you go on to passive aggressively devalue everything that the video is and everything that this channel is. By the way, let me just say something else. I don't go on to channels for borderlines. I don't go on to channels for borderlines that are doing whatever they do. And I don't leave comments and tell them, when they're talking about whatever their experience is. I don't even know. But if I did, I wouldn't go on there, listen to their experience and say, hey, I'm a former victim of borderline abuse, and what you just said is a bunch of nonsense. I don't do that, because I respect their need to interact and communicate and heal. This channel is about victims of narcissistic abuse, and previously, the video you're responding to, this channel was about helping victims of borderline abuse. So if you really are this person full of compassion, then the first thing out of your mouth should be, I'm so sorry that you people have gone through that. You should also put some effort into looking at the comments. The channel is filled with thousands of comments of people who've been abused, who appreciate the channel. And so the idea that I'm coming out of left field and I don't know what I'm talking about, and I have this magical power to somehow convince everybody of all of these overgeneralizations and things that aren't true, it's not rational. And you're devaluing every single other person on this channel who has left a comment. So again, if you're a borderline and you're coming onto this channel and you're going to come in here and you're going to passive aggressively, condescendingly instruct us about how wrong we are, then it shows what little compassion, empathy you have towards those who have been damaged. So at least have some compassion. Show that you're not sociopathic. Don't make it all about yourself. We're not all like that. And in fact, you're wrong, and I'm sorry you went through that, but I don't do that, because that's really what you're saying here. And I don't know you, but based on this, I get the feeling that you gaslight, you justify, and you victim blame, because that's what you're doing here. And just because you say, hey, it doesn't doesn't take any of it away. Doesn't take any of that devaluation away. And it doesn't somehow make us think that you're not what you are. Most likely a borderline who feels like they need to defend themselves. This isn't the place to do that. You want to defend yourself? Create your own channel. Don't come onto the channel. You're inside of a therapy room with people who have been abused. We have the right to have our feelings and our experiences. Don't come here and crap all over it and make it all about you. I'm not going to come into your therapy session and crap all over you when you're talking about, I can't help it, I have BPD. I'm not going to do that. You go ahead and do what you need to do. Let us have our safe place to heal. All right. I don't hate this video, but it's important not to compare everyone with BPD as the same, because not every borderline is the same. I didn't get through it, but let me address that. I've never said that everybody with borderline is the same. Never once have I said that. Find a video where I've said that every single borderline is like every single other borderline. You won't find it. Every human being is unique, including borderlines, including narcissists. Everybody's unique. But in order to be diagnosed with anything, there are some symptoms that are going to be identical. So here are 3 things that are identical in all borderlines. If you don't have these 3 things, even if you only have 2 out of 3, you're not a borderline. So if you're saying that what I described doesn't describe you, then you're not a borderline, and again, you're wasting your time. It means you don't even understand what you're talking about. Here you're trying to let us know that you do know. You have some expertise. You haven't told us where you get that came from. But here are the three things that all borderlines have. They split, they devalue, and they discard. Now, it may take 20 years before they discard you, but they will, unless you're in treatment. Now, if you've been in treatment for a successful therapy like DBT, you've got the workbook, you're doing the workbook every day, you're going to DBT group therapy once a week, you're meeting with a therapist, and you're actually putting it into practice, now I'm going to believe that you are making some progress. But if you do that, your first response, if you have the balls to come on here and respond to a bunch of people who've been devalued by people and abused by people with BPD, your first response is going to be, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. It's legitimate. We do hurt people because of our disease, and I am so sorry. There are so many borderlines who watch this channel. I don't make these videos for them, but there's a lot of them that say, I watch your channel because I want to learn. And they say, you're right. We have done this. I do this. It's hard for me to hear. It's painful, but I want to learn. Now, if you talk like that, I'm gonna believe you. And I'm gonna believe, by the way, that you perhaps have the ability to communicate and have a functional relationship. You come on here and you wanna generalize and say that I'm overgeneralizing and I'm saying that all borderlines are the same when I'm not, and you don't wanna take responsibility for the things that all borderlines have, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be a borderline. You know, now you're abusive. This comment is abusive, because not because you're yelling and screaming and calling anybody names. You're being very polite. My borderline was very polite most of the time, while she devalued, discarded, gaslit, minimized. So just because you're not upset and I have sympathy and I don't hate this video, that doesn't mean that you're not being abusive. Abuse means to be devalued. Not every borderline is the same. Don't project the pain of your experience with a label. So now he's going to make it, this is about you. He's going to, and while he's doing that, he is devaluing the assumed personal pain of my experience. He's saying, you're irrational. You're in pain. Therefore, you are doing this irrational, abusive thing to these poor borderlines, because we're not all like this. Which is nonsense. What I talk about, I'm very confident. And borderlines, the majority of borderlines in recovery who have responded to me, not that I use them to help me judge my experience, but the majority of them who are in that agree, and they say you're exactly right. So the fact that you're not aware of this, which is also possible, borderlines are also extremely unconscious. They dissociate. Because if you become conscious of the deliberate abuse and you do have empathy, borderlines do have empathy, they just can't hang on to it for very long, then you're going to acknowledge that and do something about it. So if you have this kind of reaction where you're going to generalize, minimize, devalue, gaslight, and victim blame me because you don't like the fact that I have said something that may make you look bad, then that shows me that you're very unconscious. And the unconscious ones are the most dangerous, because they'll come and they'll say, yeah, no, I'm not angry with you and I sympathize with you and I like you, and yeah, but that's your problem. How many times did I hear that? Well, that's your problem. Well, I'm not going to take that on. That's your problem. Yeah, I stuck an ice pick in your eyeball, but you're the one that's in pain, and that you don't have to. That's your decision to be upset about that. That's what this is. It's just a very, superficial way of saying the exact same thing. So I'm not projecting the pain of my experience onto you because I don't even know you. But I'm talking about the disease of borderline personality disorder. I didn't mention any one person. I've never once this whole time mentioned the name of my borderline ex. I've never once devalued her personally or said anything about her, and never will I. And I'm not doing it now. So I'm not projecting the pain of my personal experience with a label onto everyone. I'm not projecting it onto anyone because I'm not talking about any one person. But every single person who has BPD does those three things: splits, devalues, discards. And those things are they're not just abusive. They're not just a problem. They're not just a relationship problem. Let's be clear about that. Myself included. Everybody that I know that's been in a relationship with a borderline who loved them unconditionally would have put up with the moodiness, would have put up with the, disappearing for hours at a time, would have put up with all of the roller coaster ride because we loved you. What we can't put up with is the lethal abuse of splitting, devaluing, and discarding. Those things nobody can survive that. That's what you're not getting here. It's not that some people don't have enough balls to handle it. It's that kind of abuse is lethal to anyone. When you split, devalue, and discard, gaslight, victim blame. When you do that kind of stuff, especially the discard, when you do that kind of stuff, it is so incredibly destructive to the other person. It can destroy their lives. And I'm absolutely not minimizing that. There are people on this channel right now who have been out of relationships for decades and years. They still come onto the channel because they are so destroyed. They're still ruminating. Now, unfortunately, these people are trapped into I talk about this on the reversenarcabuse.com video course, but they're trapped in the intermittent reinforcement stage, and even if it's been 10 years, 20 years, they're still stuck in it. And that's how deadly it is, that 20 years later, you're still being abused. The little introject in your head of the borderline is still abusing you, even though they're long gone or even dead. So those of you who aren't following my advice on how to heal, that's on you. Anyway, so don't project the pain of your experience. Don't project the pain of your experience with a label onto everyone who has a label. Well, you have a label for a reason, and the label means this person is going to split, devalue, and discard. Don't eat this food. It will make you sick. So you can do the same thing. If I go through the grocery store and I find some curdled milk and it's 10 years out of date, am I going to say, well, I'm not going to, just because it says don't eat after 10 years ago, I can't project that onto every curdled milk. I mean, some curdled milk is going to be okay. Some botulism isn't going to be bad for you. You can't put that label on everything. The borderline label means before there has been sufficient therapy and recovery, this person is extremely toxic. Borderline personality disorder does not mean I have some emotional issues. What you want me to believe is that some borderlines, they just have some emotional issues, man. No, if you've just got some emotional issues, then you're a little bit neurotic. You can go to therapy, go to 12 steps and get yourself put together. If you've got borderline personality disorder, it means you are toxic unless you do the work to get well. And somebody who does the work to get well doesn't do what you did in this comment. This video, in my opinion, well, again, what does that mean? You haven't told us what your experience is. You haven't told us what your expertise is. Because if you say I'm a borderline, we're going to go, well, of course you're going to say that. You're a borderline. So your opinion is meaningless until you qualify it. The person says this video, in my opinion, is evidence of something not yet diagnosed that I know of. So watch the video again. The 6 traits of, that borderlines do to destroy relationships. What you're going to see is that in the comments section, you're going to see people who said, that's exactly right, I totally experienced that. So either I have such incredible power that I'm making stuff up, and I have such an incredible power to project that into people's minds that I have the ability to hypnotize them into believing it also. Or perhaps I'm bringing to light and explaining in ways, things in ways that people who are still struggling can open their eyes and go, that's right, that's exactly what my experience was. Thank you for validating my pain. Thank you for validating my experience. So I'm going to do that. And again, this quote happens to be in response to a video about BPD abuse, but I'm here to help anybody recover from narcissistic abuse, even if that's a borderline or a narcissist. And so that's why I put all this stuff out. So reversenarcabuse.com, if you go there, there is a video course, an introductory video course. If enough people respond to that and I see some interest in that, I'm going to put a lot more stuff on there to help educate and heal. But it's important to go beyond just healing the narcissistic abuse trauma. We need to get underneath it, and we need to reverse the devaluation programming. And so that's what that's about, reversenarcabuse.com. I'm also doing it on my other channel, which is Thunder Wizard, and we're talking about what's called quantum shifting. Quantum shifting is the ability to actually go in, reprogram your memories, reprogram your unconscious. Because, borderlines are abusive because they have been abused. They have been programmed, and they have a defense mechanism that responds in a way that is very toxic, unfortunately, to people. And if they had the ability to go in there and reprogram that, they would not only be free of their pain, but they wouldn't cause pain to others. So I'm not saying that I'm going to cure you instantly. That's not what I'm talking about. This is an exploration. This is a new way of looking at things. This is what I have been doing, in my over 40 years of personal recovery in 12 steps, therapy, spiritual practices. Quantum shifting has actually been revolutionary for me. It's been very, very amazingly transformative, and it's transforming me on the deepest levels of my programming, both spiritual as well as psychological. So that is quantum shifting. You can get the free quantum shifting level 1, which you can see at the Thunder Wizard channel, or at thunderwizard.com. You can watch that for free there. And then if you want to, you can get the other quantum shifting courses. And again, if there's enough interest, I'll finish the whole series. And we get to one video where I talk about 11 specific practical steps that I take in order to bring this quantum shifting and healing into my life. So there you go. Those resources are there available to you. But in the end, when it comes down to it, I'm not going to let people who have been abused, victims of abuse, I am going to stand up and speak for them. And it is not because I'm looking to devalue or, make it, somebody, unfortunately, people with BPD have a mental illness, and that is incredibly difficult, and their impulses are incredibly strong, and somebody can make the argument that they can't help themselves. I understand that, but that doesn't mean that the abuse that they cause is minimized in any way. And the people who have been on the other end of that abuse deserve to have their experiences validated. So anytime somebody comes on here with this passive-aggressive, condescending, gaslighting, victim-blaming stuff, I'm going to point it out, no matter how nicely they do it. Because being nice doesn't change. There's plenty of really nice, passive-aggressive people out there who are hurting a lot of people. Communal narcissists do this extremely well. We'll talk about that as time goes on. So that's it for me, guys. I wish you all the best. Please remember that you have value simply because you exist. There is nothing you need to do to be loved or accepted. Your value comes only because you're alive. Your lovability comes only because you're alive. And there is nothing you need to do in order to accomplish that. And if you can own that and really let that get in there, this is where healing begins. So that's it. I wish you guys all the best. I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Please take very good care of yourselves.